Hi there, it's CEPA fellow Carrie Oderman. Welcome to the CEPA Podcast, where we bring together leaders and experts from both sides of the Atlantic to explore the biggest challenges shaping our world today. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the CEPA Podcast. I'm Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to speak with a dedicated public servant whose career spans local leadership in Ohio to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and now almost 25 years serving the great state of Ohio, its 10th Congressional District, Congressman Michael Turner, who is playing such a crucial role in shaping America's approach to security and broader international affairs. Congressman, welcome to the CEPA Podcast. It's so wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you also for your leadership and the leadership of CEPA.
Thank you. We were so delighted to have the opportunity to honor you with one of our Transatlantic Leadership Awards 2 years ago. So this is such a nice opportunity for us to follow up to that. But I want to start us off with what has become a tradition of the CEPA Podcast, which is the hardest part of this conversation. It's our lightning round. So whenever you're ready. Ready?
Ready.
Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay. Dayton Philharmonic or Sarajevo Philharmonic?
I like them together because I hosted them both together. We had Marin Alsop conduct them, and they played together as one in a concert for peace. So together they were extraordinary.
That's incredible. I wish I could have been there for that. It sounds amazing. But
Beethoven's Fifth was the most extraordinary I've ever heard it, with the two of them playing together.
Amazing. Okay. Favorite Wright brother, Wilbur or Orville?
That's really hard too, because it couldn't have happened without both of them. I mean, if you read the history, and it really was a team project. They really did act in such a coordinated fashion. They dedicated their lives both to each other and to the accomplishment of flight. Together, the Wright brothers brought us all closer together. So it would have to be the brothers together.
That's a very diplomatic answer. So you're staying neutral on that one. Okay, and I learned that the Wright brothers are actually from Ohio, even though a lot of folks don't associate them with Ohio because they did most of their test flights elsewhere.
It's unfortunate in North Carolina to claim heroes have to claim people that vacationed there.
Okay, I have two more for you. Dayton Dragons or Dayton Flyers?
I'm an alum, so I have my MBA from the University of Dayton, but I built the stadium for the Dayton Dragons while I was mayor. So I worked to bring them there. I would have to pick the Dayton Dragons since I played a crucial role in them being in Dayton.
Very good. And last question, your favorite book?
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one because there's just so many. I guess I'd have to go, if I was going to go for kids. I loved reading Charlotte's Web to my daughters. So I would say, Charlotte's Web.
That's a great book for kids. I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking part in that. I also learned that you're not a big sports fan. Neither am I, to be honest. I know a little bit, but just enough to get by. So you and I have that in common. I also learned that. The questions were structured a little bit more differently than usual, which are always usually so sports focused. But Thank you for having fun there.
Yeah.
Let's get into some more substance now.
Yeah.
You joined the U.S. Congress. You were elected in 2002. But before that, you served for 8 years as the mayor of Dayton. And I wanted to just ask you to reflect on your career, both as mayor for 8 years and then now almost 25 years serving in the People's House in Washington. When you think about those last 30-something years of a career, how do you reflect on the shift from being a local mayor to going into federal government, serving legislative branch? And how do you think about what the world looks like now versus when you first started your career in public service?
The two jobs are somewhat similar because you're being an advocate for both your community and your nation, whatever your region, and in that I represent my community. They're not similar in that you're, as being the mayor, you're a little more hands-on. You live in your to-do list, where in Congress you go into the federal government and advocate for your community, and you do take on both national issues and local issues. But even as being a mayor, you are advocating on the state level, on the national level. But I think in all of them, you really do have to look to the future. You're trying to impact what's going to happen tomorrow. I think that's what really, I think, is the big motivational factor to anybody that picks up the issue of how are they going to go serve, either in a local position or in a national position, is that they're looking to the future and how can they go impact things and make them better for tomorrow.
Just thinking about what the world looked like, let's say in 2002, when you first went to Congress, obviously it was, shortly after the attack on the United States, 9/11, fast forwarding to where we are now, where there's a lot of conflict in the world still, and certainly I think many of us worry that our own national security continues to be vulnerable for all kinds of different reasons. How do you think about, I guess, the security threats that are out there now, versus when you joined? Are we in a more serious moment now where you're more concerned, or do you feel like that moment after 9/11 was really the peak of our vulnerabilities?
Well, I think the times are really very similar in that the vulnerabilities, the threats that we had then, the threats we have now, are really all because of neglect of our own understanding of that we have adversaries and not paying attention to the threats of those adversaries. In 9/11, we weren't really looking as to the threat of terrorism and how it can affect us and what we need to be doing, and then how it was evolving. And then during that period where we were focused on terrorism, we really weren't focusing on our major adversaries. We were coming off of the so self-declared peace dividend that really wasn't a peace dividend. And now here we are again with our adversaries of China and Russia, still with Iran and North Korea as emerging major threats. But really with China and Russia now having so modernized as a threat that in many ways, some of their capabilities are bypassing our own. And we really need to reinvest, not just to ensure that we have capabilities that can deter those adversaries, but that we have capabilities that can match or exceed our adversaries. Because the whole aspect of being able to remain safe, both the United States and with our allies, is to ensure that collectively that our adversaries see that the deterrence is there, that they don't see our vulnerabilities as greater than what they see as the opportunity. And that's really what, when we don't plan to close those vulnerabilities, especially in a way that our adversaries assess them, then we're at risk. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that as we turn to one threat versus another threat and ignore them, then it gets more risky for us. And for Russia and China, we have ignored those. And that's what we saw certainly with Ukraine, with the adventurousness of Russia, where Russia believed that the West's vulnerabilities were greater than the threat to Russia itself.
So I want to talk about Ukraine and Russia's war against Ukraine a little bit. But before we get there, just going back to the reflection question that I asked you at the top, I was struck by the fact that you personally have been so engaged and involved in the Dayton Peace Accords and its legacy. I think that's very much a bright spot looking over a recent history of the last 30-something years. And of course, you were in your first year as mayor, right, when the Dayton Peace Accords were signed and negotiated in the city of Dayton. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how you think about the legacy of those peace accords. We just commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords. For those of you listening in, of course, the DPA, as it's known, the Dayton Peace Accords ended a 3-year Bosnian war and genocide, claiming thousands of Bosnian Muslims, and created, relative stability in the Balkans. But it's a stability that I think is constantly being contested and tested, even over the last 30 years. I know you've stayed engaged on the region. I learned that you have become an honorary citizen of the city of Sarajevo just recently. How do you think about the legacy, what was a very successful diplomatic effort to end a very bloody conflict in the context of today's world, and as we think about where the Russian war against Ukraine might end, how it might end?
Right. Well, as you know, that Serbs, Croats, Muslims, that the Bosniaks, throughout the region had an unbelievable loss of lives during that conflict. And the fact that the Dayton Peace Accords brought that conflict to an end, of an area that had seen hundreds of years of conflict and really hatred, is quite a milestone, and that peace has held, and that where there has not been conflict in the area. What it has not done, which is what I think is really sort of the failure that the West has not accomplished, the United States has not accomplished, the EU has not accomplished, is a lasting governance, and where the Dayton Peace Accords had a set constitutional structure that did hold the peace. We haven't, by looking away at times, we didn't really finish the job of allowing the area to transition, where there had been a hope that the area would transition, I think, into a governance structure that could maybe join the EU, join NATO, and in a way it heal, so we could see it as a governing structure. That, I think, is really sort of the failure. We still have the divisions there that seem to be longstanding at this point. And the Trump administration needs to lean in. Other administrations, we've called on them to lean in. We've called in for a Dayton II, for the EU and others, our transatlantic alliance, to come together and lean in to try to help broker a transition to a more governance structure. But I think that's really what needs to happen, is that the Balkans needs to have this healing where we can see a future that's brighter than this just stasis that we have of, we don't have conflict, but we don't really have a lasting future.
And do you think, based on what you just outlined as some of the shortcomings of the DPA, but also some of the successes of it, right? It did end the brutal conflict. And of course, now we're seeing another brutal conflict in Europe with what's happening with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Do you think there's lessons learned from the process of the Dayton Peace Accords for maybe coming to some sort of resolution between in the current war in Europe?
Well, certainly. I mean, the thing that we had there, which is a little bit different than you have in Ukraine, is that you had warring factions. I mean, it was the disintegration of Yugoslavia, really the conflict that could have been a broader war in Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But in Ukraine, you actually have Russia, a superpower, trying to expand its territory and attacking a democratic state, which is different than you have had in the disintegration of Yugoslavia and the conflict that occurred there. But the issue that we had was, of course, building democratic institutions, a peace that could hold stability, and really, without the United States, that transition could never have happened. President Clinton, seeing a role for the United States, coming in both through military action and then ultimately with a military presence and a transition to a lasting peace that has held, was incredibly important and powerful.
So just thinking through the alliance structure the U.S. has led, that you already talked about, that, of course, NATO is the strongest, most deep and comprehensive defense and security alliance in history, and certainly in the current moment. And you mentioned the role of U.S. leadership and how critical that is for all of our allies, whether it comes to reaching a diplomatic solution in the wars of the past, or I think the wars of the present. You have taken such an important leadership role as at the helm of the U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Can you talk a little bit about what that body is and what it does, and why you have focused on it so much, invested so much of your time and leadership into its success?
Sure. Well, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is a parliamentary dialogue group of the member nations of NATO. It also has affiliated nations that send parliamentary groups and delegations that come together and take up the issues that NATO is debating, and also relevant foreign policy issues. And it gives the parliamentarians an opportunity to both share not only their policy views, but also substantive information that they get to take back then to their parliaments and share. Many parliaments don't have, as our Congress does, a congressional research service or even access to classified information. So the fact that we convene together and share, academic information, substantive information, hold hearings, and bring in military leaders, NATO leaders, and take in those types of substantive discussions, and then have among ourselves policy discussions, and have really the types of discussions where we come to some sort of understanding of the elements that are necessary to conclude in these, give the tools for these parliamentarians as they go back to their various parliaments to engage in those discussions and influence what happens in their various nations. That helps all of us as they formulate policies. It helps us in the budgetary decision-making that they make. It also gives us an opportunity to share with them information that they might not have about weapon systems, manufacturing systems. We do visits to industrial-based facilities, and even some military bases, so that they can take those experiences and information right back to their parliamentary floors and share it with their other parliamentarians.
In many ways, I tend to think of the NATO PA, which is an institution I've also been involved with for many years, as the connective tissue of the transatlantic alliance, because it provides opportunities for all of these direct diplomatic touch points between legislators. So given how much you interact with European legislators or European nations that are part of NATO, how do you assess, I guess, the current moment of the alliance? What are you hearing from your counterparts? How do you see the role of legislators when it comes to, I guess, shaping decisions about foreign policy in our respective countries?
Well, it's actually doing quite well. And the Secretary General of NATO points out every time he comes before our group and talks about the major issues, that all of the major issues that NATO is facing, in order for them to be adopted and implemented, have to go before these individual nations and be adopted by their individual parliaments. Yeah. So as these parliamentarians come in and are convened in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and these that come tend to be their national security focused parliamentarians, and then go back to their various parliaments, they get to help influence and form the debate of those parliaments. They're going to adopt the approval processes for NATO's policies that are trying to be advanced by the NATO, at the NAC, the ambassadors and the groups themselves that are trying to advance NATO policy. So it really is that advanced group that gets to take the first look at how do we wrestle with these important decision-making issues.
So I want to go back to Russia's war against Ukraine, which of course is a top priority for the alliance, for NATO, for our European partners and allies, and for the United States as well. We have just seen the 4-year mark of the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's quite a grim anniversary to have to think about. But looking ahead, how do you think this ends? Where do you think it ends? What would you say we should expect in 2026 from a potential ceasefire, a peace deal, continued conflict? How do you see the war moving forward this year?
Well, what is amazing is we reached this milestone. It's horrific as we look to it and the loss that has occurred. But the fact that the Ukrainians have held this line, that Russia, with all of its might, has pushed on Ukraine, and Ukraine has held this line without NATO being on that line, without the United States being on that line, with our aid and our support, our technology, our ingenuity backing Ukraine, but Ukraine standing there with their will and their force for liberty and freedom against the authoritarian aggression of Russia. It's astounding that Russia continues to falter and not move that line forward. That inspiration, I think, for all of us is the lesson that we need to learn and that we need to support. And I think that that's what we need to see. And when we say, well, where is the future? It's like, well, that's the future. That's the lesson that we need to see, is that we need to support Ukraine's effort to ensure that aggression and authoritarianism does not win. And I think back from the very, very beginning when this started, that President Xi of China flew to Russia and stood next to Putin in what we call an open mic moment. And that's when, after they were all done and they were speaking casually to each other, not part of their event, President Xi turned and said, we, meaning the two of them, are bringing about change that hasn't happened in 100 years. And that means that, we know what that 100 years is. That's World War I and World War II. And what he means is that they want to relitigate authoritarianism, the fight between authoritarianism and democracy. And they believed that this time they could win it. But here we are 4 years later, and Ukraine is standing on that line, and authoritarianism isn't winning. And I think that's the lesson of this 4th anniversary, is that the West is standing behind Ukraine.
Would you like to see the United States do more in support of Ukraine than we've already done?
Well, the United States, for everything that everybody wants when they say more, the United States is doing a tremendous amount. That line is being held because of the United States, both in our ingenuity, our co-development of anti-drone technology, our air defense systems, our drone technology that has helped them in holding back the Russians. Certainly our weapon systems, our intelligence systems, our weapon delivery systems, our coordination of all of the allies and weapon supply systems. There's not a piece of weapon system that goes into Ukraine that doesn't go through the coordination system of the United States. Now, I would like to see, and I support and have openly called for the United States to adopt Lindsey Graham and Brian Fitzpatrick's bill for aggressive sanctions, including secondary sanctions against Russia and those doing business with Russia, including Russian energy. Those would be incredibly powerful to impact Russia's ability to fund and fuel its military might, which is fueling this aggression. But when you look at the support for Ukraine, the United States has been incredibly forceful in its support.
So, Congressman Turner, I think that's a good note for us to end on. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this conversation. And We could have carried on a bit longer, so I hope to have you back on the podcast soon. And thanks again.
And I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your leadership, and I'll let you go off and do the hard work you do every day in the U.S. Congress. And thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
If you enjoyed listening, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And to dive deeper into the issues shaping transatlantic policy, visit CEPA.org, where you'll find more expert analysis and research. And don't forget, you can find us all across social media for the latest updates, thought leadership, and exclusive content. Thanks for listening.